History loves to romanticize genius. It tells us stories of gifted minds, quiet rooms, inspiration arriving gently, as if great art was born from comfort. But that is a lie, because the art that truly changed history was never created in peace. It was born from something breaking inside a human mind. Sometimes that break was loud, sometimes it screamed, and sometimes it stayed silent for years, rotting slowly from the inside. Today, we admire paintings in museums and call them masterpieces. We close books and whisper, "Brilliant." But we almost never ask the most important question: what was happening inside the people who created them? Because some artists were not simply talented, they were carrying something heavy, something unbearable. And over time, that weight split into two very different paths. There were those who could not hide what they saw. They painted it. They poured their nightmares onto canvas. Their madness was visible. On walls, in colors, in their eyes. History gave them a name later, mad painters. And then there were others. They seemed calm. They spoke normally. They walked among people. But at night, sentences haunted them. Thoughts that refused to sleep. Words that clawed at the inside of their skull. They didn't bleed on canvas, they bled into language. History gave them another name, cursed writers. Here is the terrifying part. None of them thought they were insane. They were just trying to survive, because stopping might have destroyed them even faster. So history simplified their suffering. One lost his mind, the other lost his life. But no one asked, which curse was heavier? A painting can shock you in seconds. A sentence can haunt you for years. One attacks your eyes, the other invades your mind. One screams, the other whispers, and both ask the same question: is this art or a desperate attempt to stay alive? This is not a video praising genius. This is a dissection of trembling hands holding brushes and restless fingers gripping pens. This is the story of mad painters versus cursed writers. And when it ends, only one question will remain. If genius costs this much pain, was it ever worth it? There are artists who paint beauty, and then there are artists who paint what they cannot escape. Throughout history, painters have been forced to look where others turn away, into fear, into madness, into themselves. A writer can hide behind words. A painter cannot, because paint does not lie. When a hand trembles, the canvas remembers. When the mind fractures, color exposes it. And that is why painting has always been dangerous. Vincent van Gogh, painting as survival. Van Gogh did not paint because he was calm. He painted because it was the only moment his mind became quiet. When he worked, the noise inside him softened. When he stopped, it returned louder. The cut ear was not a performance. It was desperation, a physical attempt to release invisible pain. His paintings glow with color, but that light does not come from joy. It comes from someone fighting darkness with brightness. Van Gogh sold almost nothing, but he paid with everything. Francisco Goya, When Silence Turns to Nightmares. Goya began as a court painter, elegant portraits, royal smiles. Then illness took his hearing, and with silence came visions. His black paintings were never meant for the world. They were painted on his own walls, in private, in fear. No heroes, no redemption, only humanity stripped of dignity. Goya did not scream his madness. He documented it. Hieronymus Bosch, The Mind That Saw. Hell, Bosch painted things people still cannot explain. Creatures that should not exist. Bodies twisted into punishment. Scenes that feel more like hallucinations than imagination. Was Bosch insane? Or was he simply too awake? Sometimes madness is not losing reality. It is seeing too much of it. Edvard Munch, The Scream That Never Ended. The Scream is not a painting. It is anxiety frozen in time. Munch said he did not hear the scream with his ears. He felt it move through his blood. Death followed his family like a shadow. Illness, loss, fear. Painting did not cure him. It only gave his terror a shape. Caravaggio, violence as truth. Caravaggio lived as violently as he painted. Fights, blood, murder. His light was divine, but it fell on sinners. Saints with dirty feet. Sacred stories told with street faces. Caravaggio did not idealize humanity. He exposed it. His madness was not quiet. It was explosive. None of these painters wanted to be broken. They painted because stopping felt worse. Their curse was simple. They could not hide what lived inside them. A painter's madness is public, visible, permanent. Once painted, it cannot be taken back. Some people scream their pain. Others learn how to hide it inside sentences. Writers do not bleed in public. They bleed slowly, quietly, line by line. Where painters expose madness in color, writers bury it in language. And that is why their curse lasts longer. Edgar Allan Poe, living inside the abyss. Poe did not invent horror. He lived in it. Poverty followed him everywhere. Alcohol numbed what reality refused to soften. Death visited his family again and again. His stories were not exaggerations. They were confessions disguised as fiction. Every heartbeat in his writing feels unstable, because his own was. Poe wrote about madness because madness was already sitting beside him. Franz Kafka, guilt without a crime. Kafka felt guilty without knowing why. His characters are accused, trapped, judged by invisible forces, because that was how he experienced life. Kafka asked his friend to burn his work. He knew these words were dangerous, not because they were wrong, but because they were too honest. Kafka was not insane. He was painfully aware, and awareness can be its own prison. Fyodor Dostoevsky, a man who saw execution. Dostoevsky was sentenced to death. He stood before a firing squad. Then, at the last moment, he was spared. That moment never left him. He returned from Siberia obsessed with guilt, faith, crime, and redemption. His novels dig into the human soul like interrogations. He did not write characters. He performed autopsies on conscience, and no one who reads him leaves untouched. H.P. Lovecraft, fear of the unknown. Lovecraft feared the universe itself. Not monsters, not demons, reality. He believed humanity was insignificant, meaningless, ignored by indifferent cosmic forces. His stories whisper one message: you do not matter. Lovecraft's curse was isolation. His fear consumed him quietly. He did not go mad loudly. He withdrew from the world. Sylvia Plath, when words couldn't save her Plath, wrote with terrifying clarity. Depression did not dull her mind. It sharpened it. Every poem feels precise, controlled, dangerously honest. Writing kept her alive until it didn't. Because sometimes words hold pain, but cannot remove it. Painters and writers often live in the same world, breathe the same air, witness the same wars, the same poverty, the same injustice. Yet what happens inside their minds could not be more different, because they do not process reality through the same internal language. And that difference shapes not only how they express themselves, but how deeply they can influence the people who encounter their work. A painter does not think in sentences, he thinks in sensations. The world reaches him as color, movement, contrast, and emotional shock, all arriving at once, without order and without explanation. And this is why painters are often overwhelmed by reality, rather than reflective about it, because they feel before they understand, and they understand only after the feeling has already burned itself into their mind. When something disturbs a painter, he does not ask what it means or where it comes from. He asks what it looks like, what shape it takes when fear tightens the chest, or when loneliness stretches time, and his response is immediate, almost physical, as if the act of painting were a reflex rather than a decision. This way of seeing the world makes painters dangerously open. They have no filter. Everything enters at full intensity. Light is too bright, darkness too deep, human faces too revealing, and because of that, painting becomes less an act of communication and more an act of survival. The canvas is not a message to the world. It is a place where the painter empties himself so that he can continue to exist. This is why so many painters seem unstable, impulsive, emotionally exposed, because their worldview is built on raw contact with reality, not distance from it. They do not step back to analyze the world. They stand directly in front of it and absorb the impact. Writers, on the other hand, cannot experience the world all at once because language itself refuses simultaneity. Every thought must wait its turn. Every idea must be arranged, shaped, justified. A writer is forced to slow down experience, to stretch it into sequences, to turn emotion into structure, and this process creates a very different psychological landscape. Where painters are flooded by sensation, writers are trapped inside interpretation. They do not feel less, they feel longer. Pain does not arrive as a shock and pass. It circles, repeats, returns in different forms, each time demanding to be understood. A writer does not ask what pain looks like. He asks why it exists, what it reveals about human nature, how it connects to guilt, power, fear, or meaning. And because these questions never truly end, the writer's mind becomes a closed system, endlessly processing itself. Thoughts echo, doubts multiply. Language becomes both a tool and a prison. Writing offers control, but it also refuses silence. Even when the page is empty, the sentences continue forming in the mind. This difference in thinking shapes how each reaches other people. A painting speaks instantly. It bypasses education, culture, and even language. Before the viewer has time to resist, the image has already entered the nervous system. The body reacts first, the mind follows later. A single image can disturb, attract, or repel thousands of people in a moment because visual language does not ask permission. It does not explain itself. It simply exists and demands a reaction. But this power is explosive rather than lasting. A painting shocks, awakens, unsettles, but it does not guide the viewer's thoughts. It lights a fire, but it does not tell you where to walk next. Its influence is intense but open-ended. Two people can look at the same painting and leave with completely different conclusions because the painter gives sensation, not argument. Writing works in the opposite direction. It rarely shocks at first glance. Instead, it invites the reader inside a process. It builds trust slowly, sentence by sentence, until the reader begins to think alongside the writer, often without realizing when the transition happened. At that point, the writer no longer stands outside the reader. He occupies the reader's inner voice. His ideas begin to feel personal, natural, even inevitable. This is why writing can alter belief systems rather than moods. A book does not end when it is closed. It continues arguing in the reader's mind, reshaping assumptions, reframing experiences, sometimes for years. Painters strike quickly, but writers stay. One destabilizes emotion, the other reorganizes thought. Because of this, painters tend to influence societies during moments of emotional crisis, when people are overwhelmed and searching for expression rather than explanation. Writers, however, become dangerous during periods of reflection, when societies begin to question their foundations. Revolutions may be ignited by images, but they are sustained by ideas. Psychologically, the cost is different as well. Painters suffer because they cannot protect themselves from intensity. Writers suffer because they cannot escape meaning. One is exhausted by too much feeling, the other by too much thinking. One burns out loudly, the other erodes silently. So when we ask whether writing or painting reaches people more deeply, the answer depends on what we mean by depth. If depth is immediacy, shock, and emotional impact, painting wins. If depth is long-term transformation of worldview, writing is far more dangerous. Painters wake people up. Writers decide what those people believe after they wake, and perhaps this is why history never chooses between them, because humanity does not change from seeing alone, and it does not change from thinking alone, but from the tension between what we feel instantly and what we understand slowly, between the image that strikes the heart and the sentence that refuses to leave the mind. By the end of this comparison, one thing becomes clear. The question was never really about who suffered more or who was more talented or even who was more important to history. The real question was always about how humans process reality when it becomes too heavy to carry in ordinary ways. Painters and writers were responding to the same pressure, the same confusion, the same fear of existence, but they chose different escape routes. One turned outward toward the visible world and tried to release inner chaos through color, form, and instant impact. The other turned inward into language, memory, and thought, and tried to make sense of that chaos by naming it, dissecting it, and giving it structure. Painters showed humanity what pain looks like. Writers explained what pain does. And this difference matters because it reveals something uncomfortable about ourselves. When we look at a painting, we often search for emotion. When we read a book, we search for meaning. One asks us to feel, the other asks us to think. And most of the time, we prefer one over the other, depending on what we are trying to avoid. There are moments in history when people cannot think anymore, when reality moves too fast, when fear overwhelms reason, and in those moments, images become more powerful than words. A single painting, a single image, can express what thousands of sentences cannot. It reaches people instantly before defenses rise, before logic interferes. That is why painters often become symbols of emotional eras, of collective anxiety, of shared shock. But there are also moments when societies slow down, when questions begin to form, when people start asking not just what happened, but why it happened and what it says about who we are. And in those moments, writing becomes far more dangerous, because ideas do not fade like emotions. They settle. They reshape how people interpret the world. They quietly influence decisions, values, and beliefs long after the initial pain has passed. This is why painters often burn out in front of everyone, while writers disappear slowly. One collapses under intensity, the other under endless interpretation. One is consumed by feeling, the other by meaning. Neither path is safe. Neither path guarantees survival. So when we ask whether painting or writing reaches people more deeply, we are really asking what kind of depth we fear more. The depth that shakes us instantly, or the depth that changes us slowly. The shock that fades, or the idea that stays. Painters wake us up. Writers decide what we do once we are awake. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: neither painting nor writing was meant to save these people. They were not cures. They were coping mechanisms, ways to delay collapse, ways to keep breathing in a world that felt unbearable. History remembers them as geniuses, but genius may not be the right word. What we are really looking at are humans who felt too much, thought too deeply, and found the only tools available to them to survive that intensity. In the end, the power of art is not that it makes us admire its creators. It is that it reveals something about ourselves, about how we feel, how we think, and how fragile the balance between the two really is. Because humanity does not change through images alone, and it does not change through words alone. It changes in the space between them, where emotion meets thought, where feeling demands explanation, and where explanation can no longer ignore feeling. And that space is where both painters and writers still live, long after they are gone, continuing the same silent conversation inside us. If stories like this make you pause, if they make you think a little longer than usual, then this channel is for you. Here we don't just talk about history, We explore the minds behind it, the fears, the ideas, the moments that shaped humanity. If you don't want surface-level stories, if you're curious about what history really felt like, subscribe, because the most important stories are the ones that stay with you after the screen goes dark.